In this episode, we're opening the gates to Eldorado, the 1974 concept album that marked a turning point for Electric Light Orchestra. With sweeping strings, cinematic ambition, and Jeff Lynne's visionary songwriting, Eldorado took ELO beyond rock and into a dreamlike soundscape of fantasy, longing, and orchestral grandeur. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff. And Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. Eric.
Very nice, my friend. Very nice intro.
Your
voice sounded like honey there.
Yeah. Thanks, honey. Yeah, thanks, baby.
Got to do it right, man. It's ELO, right?
Got to do it right.
That's right.
I was going to say it's that time of year again. It's been a year since we did an ELO episode.
I can't believe that was a year ago.
Yeah, that was crazy. Christopher Clark became enamored with Out of the Blue.
Yes, I did.
So then we ended up doing an episode, and then I don't know. We didn't. Eric and I did not push Eldorado on Chris, but somehow he found it and became even, dare I say, Chris, more enamored.
Yeah,
Eldorado. We'll get to it. Stave it.
Yeah,
I'm laying the foundation for this episode that he was just over the moon about Eldorado,
very
literally.
Much.
So when the time came to do another ELO episode, it's only right that we do Eldorado. And it was great for me to reapproach this from a different point of view that I haven't really approached this album from, because of the long history with it, you kind of have a certain mode that you get into.
Sure.
And I was
absolutely
more than happy, Eric, to take myself out of that mode and put myself into a different which made me even kind of fall in love. If it was possible to fall in love with this album even more from my perspective, I did.
Yeah, I same here. And the podcast, I mean, having someone like Chris come on and gaining new appreciation for something, it's always great to have somebody who who's might have been a fan, but not really a big fan or something, or maybe didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, you revisit this stuff and you are looking at it from that perspective, and maybe, almost to the point of view of Chris himself, right? I mean, we're kind of getting in his head. It's like, it's exciting to have somebody new to approach this stuff.
And jazzed up about it.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way about Genesis, for revisit, because I hadn't listened to them in so long, and then revisiting a lot of their stuff too.
Yeah,
when we started doing the podcast, so
we did Duke. Yeah, and then Duke was
I just there are things you have your particular favorites that you think, it's like I'm going to die on this hill, and then you listen to something else and you're like, wait a minute now,
things have changed.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And just beg for you guys giving me the opportunity to come on here, just to kind of piggyback off of that. There's a lot of records I hadn't thought about in years because one of you said, hey, do you want to do this one? Just to go back and revisit that stuff and kind of put you, not only you looking at it from a different perspective, but takes you back to that place in time where you first heard it. It's a really cool journey.
Mm.
Yeah. So Christopher Clark is here. So welcome, Christopher. And of course, Eric and I are always in stalwarts. We're always in our seats. We're planted here with you every single week as we do this. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. We appreciate it. Check out a whole bunch of other episodes. If you want to take the next step and become a supporter for independent content creators like these two guys, go ahead and do it. Go to buymeacoffee.com/3324. You can become a Green Room supporter and help us in our quest for worldwide podcast domination. We're building empires.
Yeah.
Right, Eric?
Very nice.
One episode at a time.
Exactly.
And this one is a humdinger. So let's get to the stats, because that's really always forms the basis for what we do. I feel it's kind of like laying the cornerstone of the episode is like kind of getting this information out there. Mm-hmm. So this was released in September of 1974, written and produced by Jeff Lynne. There were 2 singles released. Can't Get It Out of My Head hit number 9. Boy Blue blew by the charts and didn't do much of anything. Although, curiously enough, it was on their first compilation album, Ole ELO.
Yes, it was.
And that was the first time I heard it. And we'll get to that a little later on. Yep. It hit number 16 on Billboard. That's not too bad. Like, they were finally starting to get some traction. Yeah. That translated into being certified as gold, which means 500,000 copies. Again, back then, I'd be happy with 500,000.
Yeah,
sure.
Copies, of anything. I think today it's even hard to sell 500,000 copies. Just the way the music business is.
Well, 500,000 copies for and sort of, you dare say, an experimental ELO.
Somewhat.
By its very nature, the band was an experimental band, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that, for an album such as this, which is very steeped in the prog world, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go, Dean. There's another hat.
It's like kind of almost, in a weird way, like begrudgingly, because I still don't, because I just don't, like, in my weird mind, this is not really, I would like ELO 2. That is prog. Like, sure. If you want to listen to a prog ELO album, I say listen to ELO 2. That's like as proggy as you're going to get. This is a little different because of the subtitle, right? The subtitle, the name of the album is Eldorado, a symphony by the Electric Light Orchestra. Mm-hmm. And that pretty much, I think, is going to, if you stop the episode right now, that's pretty much going to tell you everything you need to know. If you go and listen, if you turn us off and say, I'm going to go listen to it, that's pretty much everything.
Okay. Yeah. That's fair. I mean, symphonic rock, you could, say that, maybe that's more of the
I'm sure it is
proper title.
But
it is, a lot of, because Chris, you probably back me up on this, I don't know if you read Prog Magazine or delve into that kind of stuff. So they're always, Eldorado is always listed in like any kind of prog list.
It is.
So even like,
I've got 2 accolades for you then. In July 2010, the album was named one of Classic Rock Magazine's 50 albums that built prog rock.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then in 2015, Rolling Stone's 50 greatest prog rock albums, it was number 43.
There you go.
Wow.
What a hell of a segue that was, wasn't it?
Go ELO into the prog. Into the prog.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. The way I look at it, though, it's like another hat for Jeff Lynne to wear. I mean, it's great that he, did this kind of thing. And then kind of moved on to sort of more pop oriented stuff, but still very grand.
Right.
I still consider, even Out of the Blue, is, there's some prog elements there, but I just love the idea of I just love the idea of, him having this in his history, in his, repertoire. And that I feel very much, again, I'm going to bring up Genesis, but it's like, I always love the fact that there's so much there, music, the musicality of going from something like this to something, I dare say, to Balance of Power in the 80s.
Well, it was the progression.
Right.
Yeah. Of what the idea for ELO originally was. If you go back to the first album, you'll be like, what the hell is this?
I started listening to that today.
You did?
I got through the first track, and then I was in the car with my daughter, and then that second track, it's just like strings over and over again, and I'm like, oh my god, it was getting a little.
I love it. I love it, but I can see where people are like, it's
probably wasn't in the mindset. I wasn't in the mindset to really focus on it either. So,
if you're listening to see if your daughter's listening and what she's thinking about it, like you're going to be like, okay. But I think if you sit and listen on its own, it'll be fine. So let's get into Eldorado. I mean, it's one of the most iconic album covers ever. We'll start there, and that was a fluke. Because it's one of my favorite albums. It's just a great, perfect album cover. But in England, the Wizard of Oz wasn't really a big thing. It wasn't the thing it was in the United States, and it certainly back then wasn't the thing that it was now. So it was almost kind of obscure to have this album cover with the with the ruby slippers and the witch,
Mm-hmm.
Witch, kind of trying to touch him, because in England they were like, yeah, wait, it's no big deal. It was like, okay, it's from like that movie from 40 years ago,
right?
So it was kind of a thing. But now it's like it's an iconic. I don't know if they've ever gotten sued for it, if they had gotten permission. Like, it's kind of, that's almost like having like Casablanca, a picture from Casablanca as your album cover.
I mean, I even remember, like, you think about that, like the band Rush recorded the live album Exit Stage Left, and they looked into getting like, I forget which cartoon character used to say that, the pink cat, just to have his tail like wrapped around the curtain would have like been like, it was completely cost prohibitive. So to like completely wholesale take the cover the most iconic part of The Wizard of Oz and not ever get nailed for it seems kind of crazy.
Yeah. I'm sure they must have probably, and back then I'm sure the property, again, it's not what it is now. So they probably, okay, you can use a frame.
Yeah, true.
You can use a frame.
But boy, what an image.
Yeah.
For someone of, like, say, how old were you when you first got into this? What was it, like 10? Dean? 10?
Me?
Yeah, you. No,
I wasn't 10. I didn't get into this until 80, 81, like
okay,
around there.
It was a little bit earlier than that.
No, not at all. This was all kind of, all this stuff came in a rush, at once.
But even so, I mean,
let me just preface: the album is not about the Wizard of Oz. So it is a concept album, but
it lends itself to that dream world, and sort of fantasy.
It. Yeah, exactly. It totally evokes someone who's not happy in reality, which is what the Wizard of Oz is about, right? And enters a dream world, and this is Jeff Lynne's first concept album, and he went into the sessions for Eldorado with the concept fully fleshed out. So it wasn't kind of like, oh, these songs seem to fit, so we'll make it into something. He kind of had the concept for Eldorado. Some of the songs were in response to his father, who's like, you know what, you don't really make very tuneful songs. Like, your songs aren't really tuneful. So this was kind of, can't get out of my head, was to show his dad that he could make like kind of music that he would want to listen to. And a couple of things happen here. We'll get into the backstory a little bit before we get into the tracks and the album. But if you listen to this is ELO's fourth album, so there are three before this, and this is one of those demarcation point albums where it doesn't sound like the previous albums, and it's really specific, Eric, right? It's two words. It's one man's name.
One man's name.
Lewis Clark.
Lewis Clark. Yeah. Yeah.
Lewis Clark is an arranger, right? And he kind of understands classical music. So, Jeff had big ambitions, a 30-piece orchestra. So he teamed up with Lewis Clark, who was absolutely the game changer on this album. Because like Chris was just talking about, listening to the first ELO album is very, the cellos and the strings are very seesawy, very choppy, like that. Yeah, not flowing and ethereal. Like Jeff, for all his talents, was not a classical music arranger, so he needed somebody that can handle that. And Lewis Clark destroyed it. He absolutely brought the arrangements and the lush, and he literally brought that ELO sound. Like, he was able to take the ideas and mold them into what the way they were supposed to sound.
Right. They don't overpower, like the orchestra doesn't overpower the rock and roll instruments, as it were.
Yeah.
In any way, shape, or form. They kind of work together better than they ever had before, I would think.
Yeah. And just full on like classical concert sounding arrangements, and that's why that whole subtitle of a symphony by the Electric Light Orchestra, I mean, it totally fits. Like, this is a big, grand, ambitious project to pull off. And had he not had someone like that, I shudder to think what it might have sounded like, just because they he didn't have that kind of, the knowledge or the instincts for that yet. With the strings, if you listen to On the Third Day, which is a fantastic album, just has more of a simple, we're using violins and we're using a cello, and they're kind of accenting and doing stuff, but this is off something different.
But also a lot of keyboard. there's some
Yes.
synth in there as well. So you're so maybe the lushness comes from that sort of like combining, as for that example. But here he wanted to use a full on orchestra, and yeah, you do need I dare say, I mean, like the first couple of albums, I mean, have even the players, like, I don't know if they were classically trained or not. I mean, perhaps not. Maybe they're not as classically trained as, say, somebody in a symphony orchestra. So yeah, you kind of get that rough edged, almost, very, I mean, right to the, the rock and roll aspect of it. It's just, but using these kinds of instruments for rock and roll was never really
raw sounding.
Yeah.
And that's where the prog comes in. Like, most prog bands of the time would probably use like the keyboards and the synthesizers, but then they would also use a mellotron. And instead of a mellotron, Jeff Lynne's actually using an orchestra. So it's, I guess that's maybe where you get that, right. Yeah. That's where you get the prog element from, is that he's bringing in what they were trying to do just within the confines of a 5-piece band, but he actually used a full orchestrations and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah. And, there would be 2 personnel changes after this album. Mike Edwards would leave, and Melvin Gale would come in on cello. And Mike D'Albuquerque, the bass player, who's very underrated. Oddly enough, the day we're recording this, not the day you're necessarily listening to it, but the day you're recording it today is Mike D'Albuquerque's birthday.
Interesting.
Not planned, but he was feeling the pull of being on the road, and he wanted to be with his family more. So he left actually pretty early on, and Jeff Lynne actually played most of the bass, but they still gave Mike D'Albuquerque credit, and he's in the band photo, and he's on the album and stuff like that. But this would be his last kind of quote unquote appearance on an ELO album. But he was a good bass player. He got some good riffs in there. All right, Chris. Now let's get into this now.
Okay.
What Eldorado? Why?
Yep.
Why?
Well, we started with Out of the Blue because I mentioned to you, we were just kind of conversing about it being an audiophiles record, and you said, well, let's do it as a podcast. And I listened to that record and I really enjoyed it. I played it for a week over and over again, and I really got into it. And then from there, because of just what you guys were talking about, and then I was looking at all of those like ultimate classic rock lists from Out of the Blue. I went back, and then I went to A New World Record, which is fucking brilliant, and I really love that record too. I probably like it almost as much as I like Eldorado. And then it just was a kind of a matter of where to go next. And what I really like about Eldorado is like the prog guy in me likes all the synthesizer stuff. I love all that orchestration. I did a lot of theater as a kid. Like did a lot of stage crew type of stuff, and I love musical theater and all that kind of stuff. And to me, it has a lot of those elements into it, which I really enjoy. And I like a lot of, I like the whole idea that it's like it comes across as one big piece of music, but it's also like different elements, like all the different things that are cool, that I find cool about ELO are in here. Like you've got the rock and roll, you've got like hints of like some of the dance, like the funkier stuff that they do later on some of the records a little bit further on the road. And it's just a beautiful sense. He has a very beautiful sense of melody. Like these songs they really are. I mean, they're pop songs. I mean, it's a proggy record, but it is very much a pop album as well. And I think that's it just all of these elements that I love about music all kind of like put together into this one piece of music. And that's the best way I can describe it. And it just like all the things I like about the way he uses the keyboards and stuff. Like I love like, it's not like this overpowering synthy sound, but like I love all the moog that he uses, and
not overindulgent too. Right. And I think that's what, for me, why I don't consider ELO like prog, because it doesn't go into those areas of like, we're going to leave the song and in 2 or 3 minutes we'll be back, after we do, you could probably maybe, again, go to ELO 2 and you'll get all that. But this album, and that's why it doesn't land like that, because it lands, like you said, more as a concept album and a complete thought.
Yeah. And I think part of it too, and I my kid got stuck in the car with me for a half hour today. One of the things I was talking to my daughter goes to Maria Regina High School which is in the Westchester area, and she's a part of their orchestra. and the orchestra is keyboards, strings, guitar, bass, drums. And so it's like, I actually said to her, I said, you should tell your teacher, you should tell it. And he does a lot of pop music. Like they played Chicago this past spring and stuff. They did a Muse song. So I said, you need to encourage your teacher. You should tell him to do an ELO song. And when she was listening, she was actually thoughtful about it. She goes, you know what, Dad, these songs work better with vocals. I don't think these songs will work as good as instrumentals. I'm like, okay.
There you go. All right. There you go. The musician has spoke.
But yeah, spoken. So I don't know if it's because I've been thinking of her playing in a band with that kind of arrangement that helped to draw me to ELO. But I love this music. So,
Eric, is this the truest form of ELO before we get into the album? Is this not the pinnacle of the group, but is this the pinnacle of what the experiment was meant to do?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is, the concept thing, the whole and
the execution.
Yes. In my opinion, this is why, for me, this is, I get what you're saying about extensive soloing and all that kind of thing. And, but not every prog band does that. So some bands are very songs are short, they're, whatever, but the idea of a concept album to this degree, it being about, dreamers and fantasy and all that kind of thing kind of lends itself. But yeah, I definitely think that this is probably the highest that they achieved in terms of that particular idea.
It's the most ambitious.
If what this group was meant to be and what the experiment was all about.
I mean, I'm not as down the wormhole as you guys, or have been like as into them as long as you have. But to me, it almost seems like this is the record where they figured out their sound and they figured out who they are.
Yeah.
Like it's the record where it kind of all kind of gelled together, almost like, not to use another prog band as an example, but like the first two Yes records, they're cool. But the Yes album is the album where you put it on and you're like, okay, this is what is Yes. Like to me, this is them. Yeah. This is where ELO figured it out. And then if you follow the trend of the next batch of records, it really just kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. This also in my mind is a demarcation point for ELO too. It's like the first four albums are kind of a grouping.
Yeah.
Working up to this sound, and then Face the Music through Discovery is kind of like the next grouping of their popular phase, and then Time, Secret Messages, and Balance of Power is like the 80s canon of really kind of pure pop.
Pop, but still experimental.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, Time.
Right?
I don't think Time is as straight ahead as I tried that. No, that one I actually tried to listen to, and I'm like, maybe I need to listen to the others first. Like that one was a little bit more. I found that one to be a little bit more of a challenging listen. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. All right. Well, let's get cracking on this. So this is a concept album, and it's about a guy who he doesn't have a name. Well, all we really know is that he's a banker. He's got a bank job somewhere, but he is able to leave this world and go to this magical, mythical world called Eldorado, which by all the hints in the lyrics is probably in medieval times. All right. Because there's mentions of Robin Hood, William Tell, Ivanhoe, Lancelot, Maid Marian. Right. There's all, those are from a certain particular era. There's Jeff even uses a quote from Hamlet. He quotes Hamlet in Mr. Kingdom. So he is really putting the character into a dreamland, but it's of a certain time period that is not the time period that he's in. He's able to kind of leave this world, and each song, most of the songs are about the dream. Some are of him coming out of the dream and kind of in the now, and then re-entering the dream. So, and for me, and that's the thing. Here's the revelation for me is I've always just listened to this album as a collection of ELO songs just to hear how great they are. I never really paid too much attention, honestly, to trying to connect all the songs. I just listened to Laredo Tornado because it's a great song, and I love it.
Yeah.
And then, I'll go on to, Poor Boy, the Greenwood, like each one, and they're connected and they flow, but I never really kind of sat down and parsed out the story, and that's why now when I listen to it, I really did kind of like try to because, you know, Jeff Lynne, his lyrics have never been his strong suit. And he admittedly says, I write all the music first and then I worry about the lyrics later. You know, so for this one, for him to flesh out all the stuff ahead of time really was probably a Herculean task as well, to work in a different way of having all this stuff thought out and planned out and storied and kind of storyboarded and ready to go. So
but very British, very, we're talking about very English
themes,
but very popular. And I think that's the key word there, where it's like, he's not writing his own mythology here. It's like, you know, like,
he's using
the archetypes, you know, of, you know, and that's all he needs. It's like, you know, you enter a dream world. It's like, that's the point.
He can evoke those,
right.
He can evoke the images he wants by saying William Tell and Ivanhoe and, you know, talking about merry men.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You can kind of, this is, you know, Sherwood Forest, and they're probably in the woods and drinking and, you know, partying and having a good time, you know. That's a great point, that using those, because that's what it did, right? As soon as you start hearing those names and those, you know, references, it's like, I can kind of picture this world.
And that's Jeff.
Not the Eldorado from myth of this golden city. It's just, you know, something different.
And that's Jeff in a nutshell. I mean, he's very much into the sort of rock and roll pop. You know, he's not going to dive too deep in the weeds there, and he's not Tolkien. He's not trying to create his own story. He's like, you know,
and he's not Townsend either, right? He's not going as deep as that.
That's right. He knows that, you know, this stuff will appeal to, you know, sort of like, okay, how can I approach this concept that everyone can listen to, right? I mean, it's you know, so it's not as deep, and maybe not as like sort of, I wouldn't say off-putting, but just sort of approachable, very accessible kind of thing, where people can listen and say, okay, I can relate to him talking about Robin Hood. Okay, you talk about fantasy. The cover of the album is The Wizard of Oz, arguably one of the great, you know, most popular fantasy films ever made. Yeah. So all of these things lend itself to the sort of pop aspect of ELO, right? Is what, and that it's always been first and foremost, I think, in his mind is how do we create something like this where it's not bogged down with all of this weird imagery and stuff like that, like what most of these types of bands were doing at the time, and just, you know, make it so that I could reach people that would actually sit down and listen to something, maybe a symphonic album for a change, instead of, you know, just a guitar oriented, you know, something. But yeah, you know, so and that's the genius of Jeff. I think that's where his you know, where I would say he's a fine songwriter in that way. And like, you know, he knows how to reach the right temperature there, or the hit the right buttons. Yeah.
Chris, what do you got? I know you got.
It's almost like, you know, that's okay. No, to me, it's like you think about like a Genesis at the time, where they were struggling. You know, they didn't have a hit the way ELO did with Eldorado at the time, but they were working in that prog rock milieu. But it's also like Peter Gabriel's lyrics at the time were really out there. Like, you know, you got things like Supper's Ready, and, exactly, and that's not here with that. So
exactly. You make both of you make great points that, you know, Jeff is a master of getting in and getting out.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, and that's not to say that something like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which came out the same year, right? It came out in 74 or 75.
Yeah.
74, I believe. Yes.
So if you contrast those two things, you can look at The Lamb. It's very involved, and there's a whole mythology,
very dense.
Or things that are not necessarily understood. So the point that Eric made about using things that people are familiar with, you know, Robin Hood and you know, Ivanhoe and all that kind of stuff, kind of makes it easy for someone to get into this world, as opposed to something that's totally made up with names that are made up that you can't, you know, that I'm sure Peter Gabriel visualized really well, right? And in his mind, he got it, you know, but
it's harder to get, especially if you
exactly.
You can't
hard to wrap your head around
without seeing it is the part I would, you know,
exactly.
Part of Lamb was like a stage show. Like, you don't need the stage show to get into Eldorado. So
this is a movie of the mind, and in this case, less is more, by not giving us every single. I don't need every single detail. You know, this is more about the character. It's more about the journey of the character, and not who they meet and what they do. It's more about the feelings that this person is disconnected from reality, you know, and finds no happiness in the real world, but only by going on the hilltop and sleeping and entering Eldorado.
A daydream.
Does he feel like he has these,
like a Walter Mitty.
Yeah, exactly. He's in the song Boy Blue, he's celebrated as a returning war hero. So it's not like he's dreaming of just a life in the clouds. He's, he has all these adventures, and the Greenwood, Poor Boy the Greenwood, another one's kind of like a rollicking kind of song of like kind of merriment and joy.
Yeah.
And that this person is able to kind of have those experiences outside of his body.
And, and on some level, like, yeah, it's fantasy, but it's also, how relatable is that? Like, how many of us, like,
very much,
right, slogging it out in the commute on, on the way to work. And then, like, there's the mundaneness and the repetitiveness of everything that we do of everyday life and the things we do to try to escape that. And sometimes it's daydreaming by listening to music. Right. So, that even though it's like, fantasy, it's also relatable to a person's everyday life that is stuck in that Joe job, as it were. So
yeah. And I think Jeff really kind of was able to really hit that home because that's what he really focused in on. He really focused in on this person having those experiences in dreamland and then kind of being pulled out occasionally, like Mr. Kingdom, which is obviously a rewrite of Across the Universe.
Oh yeah,
which I didn't realize. Here's
unapologetic.
Exactly.
I didn't realize it until Dean told me. I'm like, holy shit, yeah.
This is another reversal though, because I was into this before I was into the Beatles. So Mr. Kingdom was in my life. That was the song. Sure. And then when I got into the Beatles and I heard Across the Universe, I'm like, wait, this sounds familiar. I was like, this is Mr. Kingdom. But again, but Jeff is brilliant at taking those ideas and expanding upon them, and that's what Mr. Kingdom is about, is kind of like, help me get back into that dream world. Like I'm kind of stuck. I'm having kind of trouble getting back into that. Help me, please, find the rainbow's end. It's kind of like, so it's really a cool, loose. It's not a loose concept. It's a very tight concept, but the ideas are very loose that you could just kind of really attach to. You don't have to remember names. And this character came in, and Betty from the other song. It's, some concept albums are great for that.
Yeah.
But I think this is about like more of a feel than about specific things, right? It's about that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
That longing for that dream world that he returns to and then gets pulled back, and he's talking about the rooftops and just how miserable it is. And I want to go back to that dream world, because that's where everything is for me, is what I need is there. It's not, I'm not saying I'm living a life of luxury, but that life there is better than the real life I have here. So it's actually kind of really almost not pathetic, but it's sad or melancholy in that.
Yeah, it's definitely melancholy for sure.
Like when you really listen to it, that this person is just kind of, this the only way he can live.
Yeah.
Is in this dream world. So it's just, one thing I did write, Eric, that this might be one of Jeff's most expressive albums vocally. Like there's a lot going on. He's even channeling Roy or his idol. Now that when I listen back to it, I'm like, there's some in Laredo Tornado and Eldorado and the song Eldorado. There's some Roy big vocal.
Yep.
Things that he hits.
And he's, definitely sounds like John Lennon and
Mr. Kingdom.
Mr. Kingdom.
Yeah.
He's
definitely does.
God. Yeah. That's the closest he ever came to sounding like him right there. Yeah. And it's amazing because he could do that. His voice is that eclectic, at least, it was back then, of course, but yeah, he had such range. So that's,
he did such different things on each song. Like I said, Mr. Kingdom's a very slow, kind of meager, kind of sound like a delicate sounding song for all intents and purposes. But then you contrast it with Laredo Tornado.
Yeah.
Which is a much bigger vocal sound for him. But then right before that, it's kind of Can't Get It Out of My Head, which is another kind of just wistfully song.
It's a great tune.
He really put himself. I think he really tested himself on this too. Not only, musically and say, let's get an orchestra in here, but he needed to match that.
What I was
in
love
order to sell
about
it.
like that particular song and the way
Which one, Laredo? Or
can't get it out of my head is the way he sings it. Every word is you hear like, you know what I mean? Nothing's cut off. Nothing is like you hear a complete vocal performance out of that. So I think it's one of the best songs he ever like sang in that regard. And I think that's probably the reason why it was, somewhat of a hit. But the tune of it, just the sound of his voice and the way he carries that vocal and it's just, it's amazing.
Just the way that also I can't listen to that now without listening to the Eldorado Overture, which comes before it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember, Eric, when I got the cassette and I listened, I think I had headphones on the first time I heard it. I still do, but I literally got chills the first time I heard the Eldorado Overture. I was like, and I was young. I was like 13 or something, but I didn't know what this, like, I wasn't able to process what was happening because it was just so beautiful. Like these violin runs, these orchestral runs, like the music, it was just everywhere, but it was precise. But it felt like it could break out of control, but everything was so well contained. And then it kind of diminishes into this kind of, like the French horns, and then you transition into Can't Get It Out of My Head. And this is what beautiful music to me sounds like.
And just the way it kind of like all that like cacophony and that build up, and then it just resolves, and then just that keyboard.
Yeah,
it's just it's so cool.
Just a piano, really a gentle piano.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And he comes in and he's got the French horns again, and then you get into a symphonic. Like I don't know that there's better music of this type that was made. Like there's the Moody Blues, which were kind of dabbling in this kind of stuff, and other bands were trying, but I tell you, adding Lewis Clark to the team, like I said, was just like he sanded all those rough cello edges out, and he understood, you working with that orchestra how to get that out of them. And there's all those different things going on, and arpeggio runs are happening, and then there's French horns in the background. Like it's a real symphonic like thing. It's like wow, And I remember just being blown away. And when they did it live, I got chills again. I was like, oh my, like when you first hear, I'm like, oh my God, here it comes. Yeah. And I didn't realize they were doing it. And it was just like, amazing.
Did they ever do this record top to bottom live? Like
they came pretty close. When the album came out, they did about 5 songs in a row, not necessarily all of the sequential ones, but he's not big on that. He's very big on like structured set lists. And you play the same thing every night. You don't really change things up. We don't he's very regimented in that way. That's one, if there's a downside to seeing ELO live, it's kind of,
what you're getting.
You go 3 nights in a row, you're getting 3 nights of the same show. But, the interesting thing about this, Eric will be able to appreciate this, is when you listen to it on an album or a cassette, it actually does have like a beginning. Each side has a beginning and an end, because the first side begins with the Eldorado Overture and ends with Poor Boy the Greenwood. And that song has like a final resolution.
Right.
It's got that, all that orchestral kind of thing going on. And then it's like, dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
And then you turn the record over, and then you start the next part of the voyage with Mr. Kingdom. And then that resolves with the Eldorado Finale. So, the way it was made for an album is brilliant too, because it was kind of made compartmentalized, that here's side 1 and it's going to end properly. Like you just listen to a whole symphonic movement, and then you're going to turn it over, and then Mr. Kingdom starts, and you kind of get that whole, the whole rest of the journey.
Do you remember that you bought this album for me? I think it was for my birthday.
You said that in the past.
For my birthday. Yeah.
See?
Yeah. Because everybody had Out of the Blue.
That's how he knows I love him so much.
That's what we connected.
If I buy you an ELO album, you're in.
The 2 things that Dean and I connected on when I first met him was Star Wars and ELO. We both loved Out of the Blue. We both had it. Whether or not where we got those albums from, I have no idea. But we just
from the library.
Everybody had it in their collection, mysteriously. But you were the bigger fan, because that's when you really started going back and into their category, and just I opened up this package and it's like Eldorado, and I took it home and I listened to it, and it did take a couple of tries because I was I wanted out of the blue, I wanted New World Record, I wanted the poppier stuff, but
I didn't get him what he wanted. I got him what he needed.
Exactly.
Yep. You don't want to listen to that first. You want to listen to this first.
Oh yeah, I still have it. I still have that copy, by the way.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So,
this, this isn't Mr. Blue Sky. This isn't Telephone Line. But it's we wouldn't have gotten that.
I was gonna say you could see where those how you could see with this how you get how one gets to the other.
Yeah, the great thing about ELO is every album is different. Every album is a metamorphosis going towards something. Mm-hmm. Even when they reach that thing, the albums after it, like Time, and I was thinking about it today. Time is another concept album. Mm-hmm. So Eldorado's an album about a guy who is not happy where he is, so he's able to kind of live in this dream world, right, and go to this dream world. Time is about a guy who goes into the future and leaves the time that he's in, and then he's a stranger in a strange land. He's almost in a dream world because he doesn't recognize anything, nothing that he knew was there.
Right.
So and both of them couldn't be more like, one is traditional classical music and one is very, for the time, right, advanced,
very synth heavy,
synth heavy, and kind of electronic. So it's when I was thinking about him, I'm like, wow, that's kind of really cool that he did a concept album that's very traditionally classical, and then did another one that was very traditionally kind of synth and 80s based, and they're both kind of similar material, about a person who's out of their time.
The thing that I always admired about Time was the fact that he was already using patches and keyboard patches and things of the day that bands hadn't used yet. Mm-hmm. I noticed that like late, a lot of these bands like that became prominent in the early 80s, like wasn't until 82, 83 you started hearing more and more of that kind of. Jeff Lynne was already doing it. Yeah. He was already the sound of those, and it was very sort of on the nose. The concept was the 80s, right? I mean, this is where the guy existed, but the future, like for some reason, the 80s became the future. Like everything was, we're looking ahead. Like everything was electronic, everything was neon, and all this kind of thing. And he kind of, before that even blew up, Jeff Lynne already knew, like he predicted, like he was like almost a little bit ahead of its time.
Yeah, I actually, Eric, I don't know if you remember, I said that in the Time episode because there's a line in Ticket to the Moon where he says, "Remember the good old 1980s when things were so uncomplicated. I wish I could go back there again."
Yeah,
and he wrote that in 81.
That's
and
crazy.
I said it in the Time episode. I'm like, that song
he actually says
really
it
long fuse on it. That had an extended fuse on it.
The way life used to be. He says, he goes, "I wish I was back in 1981." Yeah. And this is when the album came out.
That's awesome.
So he totally put a slow burning fuse on that album. So he's just brilliant. One of the things also that I kind of noticed that, like the song Boy Blue.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, that's a good tune.
That's my favorite track.
Yeah, it was weird because it was on, like I said earlier, it was on this compilation album, Olay ELO, which I had gotten. And that was kind of my first intro into some of their earlier stuff too. But when you listen to that song by itself on a quote unquote greatest hits compilation, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Kind of like, okay, like it was kind of a cool song, but I thought it was kind of like a little quirky, but within the confines of, Eldorado, it makes perfect sense. But that's kind of an anti-war song. Right, he's kind of like, I've seen horrible things in war. Blah, blah, blah. He was, I guess, Jeff was on kind of an anti-war kick because on ELO 2, he's got a song called Kiyama, which is about war, about killing people and not wanting to do that. So again, going back that far, I think his lyrics were a little bit more kind of less about the city and being in love and this and that. He revisits a lot of those themes, but his earlier stuff was a lot more kind of pointed. towards that stuff and taking a stand.
Socially conscious of,
Yeah.
of the times,
I mean,
and it was the 70s after all. So
you're starting to come out of Vietnam right around the time of those two records.
Yeah, so I was kind of interested that he really was, it kind of kept coming up, and that's typical prog lyric fodder, right? War and anti-war, don't kill, and
fantasy.
That's one of those. That's a trope, right? That's a prog trope.
It's a trope, sure. I don't know.
Horrors of war.
Yeah, good versus evil. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking supper's. I'm thinking supper's ready. So
there you go. So the interesting thing about this, about this story, and hopefully, if we talk about it, maybe it'll inspire people to check it out. Is the second to last song is just called Eldorado. It's the title track, and it's kind of I think it's open to some interpretation. I was reading some people's takes on it where because he decides he's like. He's back in the real world, and he decides that's not for me. I'm going to Eldorado, and I'm going to stay there. The lyric is, I'll not be back. And he's not saying that to Eldorado because the next word is Eldorado, and he goes, I will be free of the of the world. Yeah. Right. And then he talks about there's no eternal life for me. So does it? Could that be interpreted that he dies? Or is it interpreted that he's just some people say, it's like a psychotic break, and he's just kind of like going to be.
I was just about to say, maybe he just lost his fucking mind.
Forever, or is he consciously making that decision? Like there is nothing in this real world that is I can't do anything with.
I mean, the opening line. I just pulled it up just to refresh for myself. The opening line reads like a suicide note, right? Here it comes another lonely day, playing the game. I'll sail away on a voyage of no return to sea. If eternal life is meant to be, it's almost like killing myself and finding out what's out there after this is better than what the banality of everyday life. Like that opening line definitely reads like a suicide note.
He's getting deep.
Yeah.
He's getting deep. Yeah.
Or is it the eternal life in Eldorado? What's Eldorado to him? Is the answer? Yeah, is the answer to his? Is Eldorado the answer to that? Is that where because some of the lyrics later on, Chris is like, "No eternal life waits for me."
Yeah, I'm going through it.
My God, I found the key to the eternal dream. So and then he says, "And I will stay." In Eldorado. So is
Eldorado a representation of heaven? Or are we just getting?
Well, I think it's a representation of where he goes, right? Whatever that is, right? Where he's been going in his mind, this alternate reality he's created for himself, or that he can go into and live. He's decided that this is where I want to be, because then the final at the Eldorado finale is, the dreamer, the unwoken fool, high on a hill in Eldorado.
Right. Yeah. Or is it just a psychotic break, right?
Psychotic break, or deciding, or like almost kind of Rip Van Winkling it, right? Like kind of going there and saying, this is, I'm not coming out of this. I'm going to stay. Nothing's going to pull me back out. I'm going to go to Eldorado, and that's because that's where I need to be. And that's where the king and lady is.
I'm not coming back. Yeah.
The unwoken fool.
Yeah,
that hits. That just
that screams prog, like the spoken word intro scream. That screams prog.
Oh, absolutely, right?
That's like I think the Moody Blues might have gave him a cease and desist on that because they're famous for all like that talking, right? Like all the kind of speaking, and then the harps are going like
Days of Future Past. That's what there's like talking interludes throughout the whole record.
Yeah. So again, he grabs from things, but he does it the right way. Doesn't overstay his welcome.
But and at the same time, ratchets it up because again, Days of Future Past, and they use an orchestra? Or is that all Mellotron? Right?
I think there's an orchestra in there.
There is an orchestra on that one too.
I think so.
That might be their like most symphonic record.
Yeah, that's definitely
for
my
sure.
Favorite.
Yeah. Speaking of orchestras, one of the famous stories, supposedly during their song Eldorado, at that point, the orchestra were, they're union musicians and they're only paid up to a certain point, and supposedly like some of them like were done with their shift and they weren't staying, and you could supposedly hear them packing up their instruments.
Yeah, I read that. That's crazy.
But I tried to listen. I couldn't. I don't have the ear for that. But supposedly they were like packing up their shit and leaving because like the session, it was like 12:01. It's like, well, we work until 12.
Oh my god!
So some of them were like packing up and leaving. It's like, yeah, great. Yeah, that'll get you invited back.
There you go.
Oh, we'll see you tomorrow. No, I don't think so.
Knocking over the friggin' the music stand and
the music stand of the papers are shuffling.
It's like when you play live in New York and they can't go past 11:01. They got to end at exactly 11.
Yeah, that's when I saw was it the Pier in Brooklyn? Was it called Pier 17? The concerts have to end by 11 o'clock.
Yeah,
this is like a noise ordinance.
Yeah, Radio City super strict like that too.
Yeah. A little bit of trivia. I don't know, Chris, how familiar are you with Hooked on Classics? Did you ever hear of Hooked on Classics?
I've heard of them, but I've never actually, not anything that I've spent any great deal of time.
It was kind of big in the mid 80s, and it was taking classical music and just putting like a dance beat behind it, like and then it's like Flight of the Bumblebees, like that was Lewis Clark was the mastermind behind that.
That doesn't surprise me.
But Lewis Clark was also on 2 Ozzy albums. He arranged Diary of a Madman and Bark at the Moon. There were songs that he arranged, and that was Lewis Clark from ELO, who's obviously on Jet Records, who is Sharon Arden, and her father's Don Arden, who had a ruled with an iron fist over Jeff Lynne, and Ozzy and Roy Wood was on Jet later in his career, so he just had an iron fist on all that. So
in fact, when she was interviewed by Billy Corgan, she said she realized what her father was doing to his artists and how it wasn't right, because she was very close to Jeff Lynne, and Jeff Lynne basically said, "Your dad's ripping me off." And that's when she realized what a bastard her father was when it came to doing business.
Sharon?
Yep.
He's walking around like, oh, Sharon. Sorry.
Where's my ham sandwich, Sharon?
You want a burrito, Sharon?
Sharon.
It is a definite, a small world when it comes to music. I mean, there's so many connections.
And,
you know,
and just how they're all. And all the Birmingham connections, like, because you got ELO, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath. They're all kind of from that same neck of the woods.
Yeah, and that's how Bev Bevan ended up drumming for Sabbath. You know, he actually did some arranging for the Asia album Astra, which was that was the third album Astra, or second album was Astra.
It was
Alpha was the second one.
Alpha was
and then Astra.
Third, yes, that was the last.
So he did some arranging there, and then he also worked with Renaissance. If you want a really prog band, go with
someone I went to high school with plays bass in Renaissance.
What's that?
Someone I went to high school with played bass on the last Renaissance tour.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
Not an original member.
Not an original member. No, they actually rose out of the ashes of the Yardbirds in the late 60s.
Zombie.
No. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, we lost Lewis Clark in 2021. But he pretty much became the arranger through Xanadu. They didn't need him for time, obviously, but then I think he played keyboards with ELO on the tour, but then came back for Secret Messages and did some arranging as well. So, like I said, like that, there was some secret sauce that was needed, and it with this album it just came together.
But Jeff would become disillusioned with that though after a time, wouldn't he? Though Jeff Lynne, I mean, he was kind of done with the strings, and
he couldn't wait by the 80s. He's like, I'm done. Like I can only do so much. I need to kind of
which is a shame, because I mean, you still get those flourishes, right? And even in their 80s stuff, there's those little hints of what was. And I always loved that, all those little patches and such.
Well, I think that's what kind of still connected him, is he didn't let it. He didn't totally put it in the closet and shut the door. Like it was still, and maybe it was against his impulses too. Maybe it's just like, I gotta put this little piece in because it's ELO. Like he might have also felt like almost like a little obligation to put that in. But if you listen to Armchair Theater, it's there's some strings on there. It's not totally. It's not radically different from it's from anything.
Probably just the idea of like I want to know that it's there, but I don't want to rely on it either. I don't want it to become like the only focal point of the band is that we're the band that does the strings. Kind of like Chicago kind of got boxed in by the horns.
Yeah.
Do you think?
They were but some of the horn players were also founding members.
Yeah, well, that made it a little more
everyone was basically sidemen, but with the Chicago was more of a kind of a democracy.
Right, exactly.
Yep. And they wrote songs too. They wrote hits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's a whole hell of a lot of this kind of thing happening today. There's bands out there that are very proggy and whatever, but I think it's so much more guitar driven and sort of that harder edge, almost metal approach.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you think something like this could happen again? Like, do you think Jeff has this in him?
Dude, you read my mind because I was going to ask that later. I was going to be like, it's something like this. In the day and age of most people self-produce their music and they use Pro Tools and they do things on a shoestring. Like, I don't know that something this like you would need really big label backing to try something this ambitious, and you would need to have the clout to do it. Like Taylor Swift could probably get away with it.
Yeah,
I don't think artist X, Y, or Z could. Just because of what's involved. If you were going to do it legit, again, you can probably replicate this at home with samples and patches and sequencing, but that's not the way it was done.
The constant, I'm always bringing up Genesis. I'm always bringing up, but IO, Peter Gabriel's latest, has those. I mean, but he's got 1 million people working on this record. I mean, he's got musicians up galore, up the wazoo. I mean, he's got strings, he's got horns, he's got the whole spectrum. And for a guy that's in his 70s to do such an album as this, I would love to see Jeff Lynne kind of get back to that.
Pull it out one more time.
Full on, full band sound of, instead of him just trying to do everything himself. When he redid those songs himself, I love the fact that he could do it. Yeah, and I love that but I just wasn't as impressed.
Yeah, I wasn't
with the overall sound of it. Because it almost sounded like demos in a way, like high polished demos. I would just love to see this kind of thing happen again, and before he stops, you know what I mean? I don't know when I don't know if he's going to be touring anymore, but
no, this is it. But he said he's got more music. But
he's got more music.
He's become what he wanted to be, is self-contained. He can just do everything himself. He can play. He's not a very good drummer. Like, that's his weakest point, is like,
he has appeared on drums on records though, right? Didn't he play on a couple of
he plays drums on all his own albums now. Like,
does he really?
He gets somebody for the tour, but it's not,
he doesn't get behind a kit and record himself playing the kit. What it is like he builds every drum. Literally, I think that's the case. He because he's so meticulous in every role, every sound.
He's not very good with fills. Bevan is like, a drummer is
not fluid.
You need a drummer, to really kind of cement an album, and that's.
Although I was very impressed with what's the one song on the Chuck Berry song he does on Long
About the Train.
I was very impressed with that. And of course, and the Roy Orbison song too, the cover. The drums on those two songs are really, really good. It sounds like he's actually playing right there. So I don't know if that's the case, but for the most part, I think he actually does, record one part of a drum fill and then put it on a separate track, and
adds a cymbal in each time. Like
those building blocks are just, I can't see how anybody could really do that, and just go back to that one little part. Okay, I want to hit that tom. I want to do this. I want to do that. It's amazing the way he works and the way his brain is wired.
Buckinghammer the same way. They're song architects. So, all right, let's get back to this. I mean, God, this is obviously a gushing episode, but we're gonna start to close it out so we don't kind of retread anything, but if you're gonna, Eric sometimes designates albums as headphone, like a New World Record, I think Eric said is a headphone album. I think Eldorado is. You got to find a good crisp version of it though. Like I've been listening to it on YouTube Music and it just doesn't pop. I actually was listening to it today. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put the damn album on. Because I'm not getting, I wasn't getting what I wanted from it. So actually I went inside, I pulled out the vinyl, I put it down and I sat down and I'm like, okay, there it is. And this is one of those albums that you want to let yourself be enveloped by. You want to be like, you're ostensibly, you're becoming this character. You really are taking, the character is nameless and faceless and all that stuff. So you literally are the avatar in this concept album. It's not like Tommy where it's a specific person and we're hearing about what's happening to him. This is kind of more of, you're able to kind of put yourself in.
I mean, and I will say, like, the first time I really listened to this record, I put it on through headphones while I was doing some grading. And I think what made it pop is when Mr. Kingdom, like all of those strings and keyboard flourishes in that song came through the headphones, and I went, what the fuck is this? And that's where I really is like, okay, now I'm gonna really, maybe I should do this when I could really pay attention.
Yeah, like everybody got A's after that.
Yeah, right. It was one of those kind of, it was just like, I stopped. I'm like, holy shit, what is that? And then, and that's really the listening to it on headphones for the first time, as I really think what drew me into wanting to do a deeper dive.
I think let's do some quick favorite songs, and then I'll go into like a final statement or a plea to if anybody is listening that can help us out with this. So, Chris, what? So obviously, Mr. Kingdom.
That's probably my favorite song on the album, and it's not so much for the across the universe vibes of the verses. It's more of like what really hit it where you would normally hear power chords, you're hearing like piano crashes and like the strings like that. Just it blows my mind the way that's arranged. It's so beautiful sounding. I really like the fact that as you're going through all these different styles of music, then you get to Illusions in G major, which is just like this. It's almost like a classic like 50s or early 60s rock song with all of these like orchestral arrangements. I really dug that one too. And Boy Blue is definitely one of my favorite ones too, because it just like after can't get it out of my head, it kind of picks up the pace of the record and takes you on the rest of the journey.
Yeah, but Boy Blue is probably the closest descendant to On the Third Day.
Okay.
Would you say that, Eric? Yeah. Like in sound, it's kind of a little stripped down. You hear more of the ELO cello players on that one. They're a little more highlighted. When I was listening to him, like, this kind of, if there was going to be something that they would put into On the Third Day, I was like, Boy Blue could kind of fit in.
That has that little, synth, the do 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 do. So it's kind of like that watery type of keyboard sound going on there, Richard Tandy. But that's my favorite track.
Right. And I really like
Boy Blue. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
And then I really like how funky Poor Boy is. Like without going into every song on the record, I just like how that one is like really like almost has like a dance-ish vibe or like a funky vibe to it. I love how and again, I'm gushing and I don't mean to cut other people off, but it's just like every song is a different mood, but all kind of fits within the context of this one bigger piece, I think is what makes this record so awesome.
Poor Boy is different because it's heavy on the acoustic strumming guitars.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's very kind of like there's, especially when it follows Laredo Tornado, which is very electric guitar heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And almost kind of like and the lyrics are kind of almost Native American. Like he's talking about, happy hunting grounds and buffalo, and it almost has like that, almost a Native American back rhythm to it, like the doom, 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 doom. So it kind of interesting. So we'll go with Eldorado Overture. I could just, again, it could bring tears to my eyes. And it did when I heard it live. Laredo Tornado, because that's my username on Woot. I don't know if you ever heard of Woot.com. It's a shopping site, but that's my username is Laredo Tornado. Nobody's Child is kind of interesting for me. It always felt to me like there wasn't a whole lot to it, but the more I listened to it, I'm like, it kind of fits in, when you're listening to it in the context of a story. There's actually someone else involved. There's this woman, obviously a woman of the night, who's involved in his dreamland, in his dream world, that he's kind of being seduced by her. So I thought that's kind of interesting. And then just the song Eldorado is just him, whatever's left in the tank vocally. He's just, I don't think it was recorded in that order, but by the time you get to the song Eldorado, it's like it's the biggest vocalized, it's the biggest song vocally. He's really going for it. He's really putting all the emotion into it. Like I said, he understood the mission also, that this wasn't just about the music. Like, you've got to sell the story, and you've got to sell the emotions. And I think I don't think I've ever heard him kind of more emotive consistently on a whole album than this. So that's going to do it there. Now I'm going to make a plea. This has always been my plea. I wish they would release this album without vocals. I just want to hear this album instrumentally. I want to hear this album as a symphony.
I'm sure on YouTube there's something. I can
do it myself. I have the ability to do it myself. I can remove the vocals from all the songs, but I would like to hear a proper, mastered, really great version of this album without lyrics.
That'd be interesting.
Hear the beautiful instrumentation, and hear all the things that we're not going to hear because we're listening to the vocals. All the great arrangement that was done on this, it totally deserves it. And they teased it, the ELO special edition, the remaster from like 2000 whatever, 5 or 6 or whatever, which is not available. It's not on Spotify. It's not anywhere. They did a little Eldorado instrumental medley. So they went through like most of the songs and played like 30 seconds of each without lyrics. It was like the biggest tease ever in CD history. It's the biggest tease in CD history ever, was to do that, but then not just do the whole thing. So if anybody from Sony or Jeff's camp or anybody that can do it, a proper release, I know I can do it myself, but I want a proper, really nice package. Like, give Eldorado the respect that it's due from the musical standpoint. So I just did a fast look now. It's all over YouTube. Like, you can get the whole record on YouTube that way. Pretty much. I'm sure everybody's done it, Yeah. And it stands on its own that way. I've done it with a couple of songs, and I can just listen to it.
That's awesome,
and it's just incredible. So, Christopher Clark, any final thoughts on Eldorado?
No, my final thought is like, it really is, it lives up to the reputation. Like, going through all those lists when I was trying to decide what records to listen to, this one was always in like the top 2 or 3 of their catalog on those like greatest, best. It really does live up to that reputation. It's amazing it's a demonstration of what pop music can be and how brilliant pop music is when it's recorded properly. And like, I really love the record.
It's a testament to what was going on in the 70s too. Cause you had all these different camps. Like I said, Genesis was putting out The Lamb. I was down on Broadway the same year. You had, whatever Zeppelin was doing in 74, and then whatever you mentioned, Chicago. Like, there was so much different music going on, and all these guys were at like the top of their game. Before I kick it to Eric, so Chris, in a year from now, what ELO album are you going to be
I don't know. Like, I was thinking about
just so Eric and I can kind of get ready. Is it going to be on the third day?
I want to do that on the third day, but then I was also thinking Discovery too. But I think I want to
Discovery.
Okay, sure. I'll be ready for Discovery next year.
We will reconvene next year. Absolutely. Discovery. Yeah. Maybe we'll do a Discovery, and then we'll do like a little bonus half hour of Xanadu.
That sounds good.
Like a little kind of like a half, because it's half an album. So
I always think of Olivia Newton-John when I think of that movie.
We'll do like a Xanadu, like aperitif dessert. It's like having cappuccino.
Yeah.
After dinner, it's like that's what Xanadu will be.
Now I gotta go check on the third day though. Now with all this talk about,
I think you're gonna dig. I'll tell you one. I'll tell you what. Go ahead, Eric. Go ahead.
I personally think you might even like that album more.
Yeah,
because I think in terms of the more proggy, more keyboard heavy. There's some really great stuff on there that I think you'll really dig.
I can tell you, and it's one of the reasons why I love ELO, but it was such a weird thing. I remember when I got that cassette and listened to it, I had thought that I'd pretty much heard that whole album before. Like there's no way I could have. There's no way I could have. But every song on that album was so familiar to me for some reason. I'm like, everything just sounded not in a redundant, like, oh, someone else did this. Not like Mr. Kingdom.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I just listened to it. I just immediately felt comfortable. Like, I feel like I know all this stuff, or I feel like
I had that very same reaction to Grand Illusion.
I was very comfortable with it.
Grand Illusion. I could see that. Yeah.
Okay. So Eric, closing thoughts on Eldorado.
It's just a brilliant record all the way through. I mean, like I said, Boy Blue is my favorite standout track, I think, but I don't think you're going to find, the fluidity of it. The way the songs are connected, the way that like you say, the arrangements and how they flow into one another. I think it's one of his best efforts production wise. I think he really kind of, he almost peaked already, but the best was yet to come though. You know what I mean? Like sort of, but you almost feel like there was this really high,
like 27.
God, yeah,
27.
I think he pleased his dad.
Yeah, seriously.
Who was? I mean, I didn't know this. I thought his dad was just just being a dick. Really, I thought he was like. But apparently, he was a classical music lover. So I guess he knew what he was talking about, I suppose, or what he was into.
Yeah.
But
he didn't get that long hair stuff that his son was doing.
Yeah. So
he was. What did it came out in 74, right? So he was 27.
Yeah, 27. Jeez. Again, all on his own. Like, again, it's on this guy's back. ELO was a group, but as we've learned, it really was kind of more Jeff and then people that performed the stuff for him.
To help him realize his vision,
help him, but that's what you needed. Again, and that's the difference. That's why his stuff today sounds differently, because he's playing. It does make a difference having other people play this stuff. Mm-hmm. So final thoughts for me. Yeah, this one is, like Eric said, it's brilliant. It's masterful. It's beautiful. It's poignant. It's bittersweet. It's, it's a lot of different things. If you let it in, and it's not like today's pop music, and it's certainly not 70s classic rock either. It's not like Styx or, Meatloaf or anything like that. This is a standalone piece in the ELO canon. They kind of did this, and then, Face the Music was moving on from this. It was, kind of completing, sending ELO into their popularity phase with Evil Woman, etc., like that.
Yeah.
Like Strange Magic, all the great songs on that. But let us know what you think. Check it out. It's available on all the streaming platforms. You have to sit and listen to it in one shot. There's really no kind of like the Wall, Dark Side of the Moon, Tommy, Quadrophenia, all those great albums that are statements. You can't listen to Can't Get Out of My Head and then try and listen to something else. It's not that long. Take the journey, let yourself open up to it, and I think you may not enjoy it as much as us because we're homers, but homies are going to homer like we do. So if you've made it this long, thanks for checking us out. New episodes come out every week like clockwork on Thursdays, and you can check them out there. And like we said in the beginning, there's a bunch of older, different episodes in the back, a couple of ELO ones, a couple of other ones, and a whole bunch of movie episodes as well. So we've got a lot of content for you to keep you busy until we meet with you again. So for Mr. Christopher Clark, by the way, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
Always. Eric, we've got 364 days to get ready for Discovery. So start listening now.
Okay.
Once a day until then, and then we'll be.
I'll be ready.
We'll be ready. And of course, Eric and I will be right here. He's going to be on his comfy couch. I'm going to be at this computer listening to Discovery right now, because once I've got my assignment, I need to fulfill it and start getting into it. So until we meet again, for Chris, for Eric, this has been Dean. We will catch you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.